Hi, this is Todd with Cemetery Walks. I am here today at Marietta City Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia. This very large cemetery is located behind the Confederate Cemetery. It was actually established before the Confederate Cemetery, I believe. And uh, we're I'm here primarily to visit the grave of a young girl who tragically lost her life through horrific acts. And it turned out to be uh, a very tumultuous event and time period here in Marietta and Cobb County, for that matter. And that young lady's name was Mary Ann Phagan. So just sit back, relax, and I'll tell you the unfortunate tale of Mary Phagan.
Cemetery walks. Come on a journey through the veil of time, where the voices of the lost in the silence chime. With every step, their stories rise through the mist where history lies. A cemetery walks, we'll find their trace, unravel the lifetime can't erase. Cemetery walks, the past comes alive when history talks. Cemetery walks, the past comes alive when history talks.
In the spring of 1913, 13-year-old Mary Ann Phagan of Marietta, Georgia, was a bright, hardworking girl. She earned a small wage at the National Pencil Company factory in Atlanta, money that helped her widowed mother make ends meet. So it was April 26th, a Confederate Memorial Day back in 1913, when little Mary went into the National Pencil factory to collect her paycheck. She never returned home. The next morning, a watchman found her body in the factory's basement. She had been beaten, strangled with a cord, and her dignity stolen. The horror of her death gripped the state, and the hunt for her killer began. At first, suspicion fell on the night watchman, Newt Lee. But soon, attention turned to Leo Frank, the factory superintendent, who was a well educated Jewish businessman from New York. The trial of Leo Frank for the murder of Mary Phagan began on July 28, 1913, in Atlanta, presided over by Judge Leonard Roan. By this time, the case had already been saturated in the newspapers and gripped the public imagination, turning the courthouse into a theater of outrage. Jim Conley, the prosecution's star witness, delivered the most damaging testimony against Frank. He claimed Frank asked him to help cover up Mary's murder. According to Conley's testimony, he said Frank told him he had picked Mary up, she had hit her head, and then he needed Conley to move the body to the basement. During the investigation, 2 murder notes found by Mary's body, which were riddled with misspellings and suggestions that the killer was black. Conley said Frank dictated them to him to throw suspicion elsewhere. His testimony was riddled with contradictions, but was delivered with a calm, direct style that impressed many jurors. During the testimony of the night watchman Newt Lee, he testified that Frank was unusually anxious to have him start work earlier that day. He also described the gruesome condition of the body and the presence of the murder notes. The prosecution also presented several young female employees that testified that Frank sometimes behaved in ways they considered flirtatious or inappropriate. While none accused him of assault, this was used to cast him in a morally questionable light. Frank's defense countered with testimony from employees and acquaintances who vouched for Frank's character and provided partial alibis. They also highlighted inconsistencies in Conley's statements and the improbability of Frank committing the murder during the brief window between Mary's arrival and the other visitors coming into his office. Newspapers ran sensational headlines, often portraying Frank as guilty before the verdict. This was due to anti Semitism playing a clear role, as Frank, a Jewish Northerner, was portrayed by some press and politicians as an outsider exploiting Southern child labor. Contrary to the Times, Conley, a black man, was allowed to testify against a white man, a rarity in Jim Crow South, because it served the narrative against Frank. It was on August 25th, 1913, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Frank was sentenced to death. In 1915, Governor John Slanton commuted Frank's sentence to life imprisonment after reviewing the evidence and citing serious doubts about the conviction. This act sparked public fury, culminating in a mob set on vigilante justice. The lynching of Leo Frank on August 17th, 1915, was no act of spontaneous rage. It was the work of a well connected group of men from Marietta and Cobb County, later known as the Knights of Mary Phagan. They were not strangers or shadowy outlaws. They were politicians, former and current mayors, a governor's son, and members of the Georgia legislature. They were lawmen, a former sheriff, his deputies, and a former police chief. And they were merchants, lawyers, and landowners, the pillars of their community. Their plan was precise. They traveled 175 miles to the state prison farm in Milledgeville. They cut telephone lines, silencing any call for help. They forced their way inside at night, overpowered the guards, and took Leo Frank without a single shot fired. Through the dark Georgia backroads, they brought him to Marietta, and beneath the spreading limbs of an oak tree near Fray's Gin, they hanged him. No one was ever charged. In a town where everyone seemed to know their names, the killers were shielded, protected by loyalty, silence, and social standing. 85 years later, in the year 2000, a historical marker was placed near that site. It acknowledges the role of the Knights of Mary Phagan, and it stands as a reminder of the injustice that ended Leo Frank's life. The marker recounts the events of that night, how a group of prominent men abducted Frank from a state prison farm, drove him across Georgia, and hanged him from an oak tree. It also records the failure of the state to protect him or to hold his killers accountable. It stands as both a memorial and a warning, reminding all who pass of the dangers of prejudice, mob violence, and a justice system swayed by fear. Beneath the Georgia sun, the sign does not shout, it simply waits, to be read, remembered, and never forgotten. To this day, historians are divided. Many believe Jim Conley was the true killer. For Mary, the truth was lost in a storm of bias, politics, and fear. Now, more than a century later, we remember Mary Phagan, not just as a name in a tragic case, but as a child whose laughter, dreams, and future was stolen. May her memory remind us that justice is not only a verdict in court, it is the steadfast search for truth, even when it is hard to find. Well, that concludes our walk here at Marietta City Cemetery. A very solemn reminder of, life is too short not to live it to its fullest in the best way that you can. I appreciate each and every one of you. for joining me here today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on our next walk. Have a blessed one.